Hello, and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alastair.
And in this 25th episode, we have got a whole lot of Moffat. We've got the new episode of Sherlock, the first episode of Series 4. We're then diverting a bit to look at the OA, the new Netflix mystery series, and then we're looking at the Christmas special of Doctor Who, the return of Dr. Mysterio, our first chance to watch a new actual Doctor Who episode in the whole of this podcast. And then we'll be looking at my recommendation from last episode, which was JLA by Grant Morrison and Howard Porter, the 90s run that made me realise that DC characters other than Batman could also be cool. So we'll be seeing if it had the same effect on Alastair. But before all that, Alastair, what have you been doing since the last episode?
Well, other than watching a lot of Christmas TV, we saw a few of the various sort of specials that were on TV over Christmas, such as the Revolting Rhymes. It's a good adaptation of the humorous and slightly dark poems by Roald Dahl. But probably my favourite thing I saw over the holiday was I went to the cinema to see a new film called The Eagle Huntress. It's a really interesting documentary set in Mongolia, in a sort of rural Mongolia where there's these sort of nomadic people who train golden eagles to hunt for them, in order to get sort of food and fur to survive. And it's about the first woman who wants to train to be an eagle huntress. The eagle hunting skill is typically passed father to son, and it's not really something that women do, but it's a really kind of heartwarming story about father's relationship with his daughter and a coming of age story and triumph over adversity. It's also got some beautiful shots of wildlife and Mongolia, so that was a good film.
Is this a new thing that's in cinemas or something? Because I actually haven't really heard of it.
It's I think it's in sort of art house and independent cinemas. I think last time we went to the Brixton Ritzy, I saw a poster for it. It may not be something you can see in your local multiplex, but if you go to an independent cinema, I think it's around now. It's probably a bit more obscure, but it might end up with a best foreign language film Oscar or best documentary Oscar.
Oh, so it's a documentary, not a fictionalized account.
Yeah, it's a documentary. Yeah, I think it was produced or executive produced by Daisy Ridley of Star Wars fame. She also does the English language narration over the top. So which is, I guess, she's using the sort of the money she's making from Star Wars to invest in other film projects, and it's good to see there's some great films coming out.
Okay, and the rest of it's subtitled?
Yeah, it's subtitled because everyone's speaking Mongolian. But it's a really interesting portrait of what life in rural Mongolia is like. Quite difficult by the looks of it, but it's interesting.
Cool. I had no idea that existed.
I'd recommend it. Anyway, Nick, what were you watching over the Christmas period?
Well, I too watched a load of Christmas specials. My personal favourites, outside of the one we'll be talking about in a minute, was the Inside Number 9 Christmas special called The Devil of Christmas, which Inside Number 9, because I don't know how well known it is, particularly outside like Britain, is a sort of horror anthology by Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton of League of Gentlemen, in which they make, I think the premise is broadly some sort of horror-tinged story set in a house or building or flat or apartment or shack with the number 9 on it. So they're quite, I guess they're sort of quite theatrical. They tend to be sort of play-like and set in a single setting. Although I think it's more sort of old cinema and TV that they're seeking to homage. Like The Devil of Christmas, without giving too much away, the conceit is that it's basically an old, sort of slightly shoestring budget, kitschily rubbish Christmas special or Christmas film about this family who go to a remote shack in Germany and get terrorised by a low-budget horror creature. And it being a sort of Inside Number 9, and it likes its sort of pulpy, schlocky stuff, there's a few sort of very sudden dark twists and so on. And yeah, it was very good. They clearly enjoyed themselves quite a lot. I guess it's quite Black Mirror in a way. It's them doing their chosen genre of anthology show. Shearsmith, Pemberton and Brooker, I think, all sort of have a lot of affection for this sort of maybe Twilight Zone-esque sort of pulpy anthology. I think they are, although they're both doing it in their own genres of interest, I think they're both sort of homaging vaguely something of a similar era.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Christmas special was fun. As I said, the fact that it's this sort of entirely standalone anthology thing does mean they could just turn up and do a Christmas story without needing to worry about anything. It's just, it's a Christmas tinged Inside Number 9 story. And I don't know if the rest of Inside Number 9 is available on Netflix in other countries or anything, but it's worth checking out if you do have access to it. It's like Black Mirror, it can be a bit uneven. There's sometimes you just go, okay, that was a sort of standard okay episode, but when it's good, it's really, really, really good.
First up this episode is The Six Thatchers, the first episode of the fourth series of Sherlock, starring Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman. This series picks up where the last left off, teasing the possible return of Sherlock's nemesis Moriarty. It aired on New Year's Day in Britain. We've had a chance to watch it. Nick, what did you think?
I mean, after Series 3, I think a lot of people were seemed to feel they were focusing quite a lot on sort of character stuff and messing around with jokes, and none of the episodes seemed to have a plot, or at least not really a very sort of strong mystery plot. It was mostly just the characters hanging out and occasionally having some angst. So this first of Series 4, they seem to have kind of received the briefing about maybe having a plot, because this episode did have a plot which drove it from beginning to end. Most scenes, in fact possibly with all scenes, did drive the plot forward, but I'd still kind of rather they did actual mystery stories rather than sort of weird espionage ones. And also, although I agree they should have had a plot alongside all the jokes, I do kind of miss the jokes. That this episode wasn't overly funny, it was a bit dry at times. I mean, yeah, to be fair, the jokes were still in there. I think Moffat and Gatiss are both sort of former comedy writers, or maybe just lapsed comedy writers, so I don't think that either of them are ever going to do a Sherlock without jokes. This episode, for the record, is by Gatiss. What difference that makes, I'm not sure. But, yeah, it was okay. I guess fundamentally it comes slightly above a lot of Series 3 for actually having a plot.
Yeah, I mean, this episode, I think, didn't strike me as particularly different from a lot of recent Sherlock episodes. I don't think it was especially worse or better than the average crop of episodes we had in the last series, or even some of the second series. My problems with the show seems to be more like kind of quite deep-rooted in how they approached it, certainly in Series 3. Namely that I think, the problem is the absence of a mystery for them to solve. They're very focused on exploring the characters of sort of Holmes and Watson and how they interact. Now they've introduced different dynamics, such as, what if they thought Sherlock was dead? What if, Watson got married? Things like that. But the mysteries have always kind of been secondary to whatever they want to do with the characters, whereas I really feel the show is more entertaining when the mystery comes first and the mystery is used to explore the characters. Like The Hand of the Baskervilles, I think, was the best example of that, and it's probably one of the best ones they've done.
I quite like that one. I felt like this one did have a plot, and there was some degree of mystery, but it did actually have a bit at the end where they confronted the person behind it and everything. It had at least some of the trappings of an actual Sherlock mystery. I just still kind of wish it had been a bit more crimey and a bit less spy-y.
Yeah, I wasn't that taken with this sort of spy plot involving... I suppose before I go any further, we should probably say there are spoilers for the first episode in this review.
It's Sherlock. It's aired in both Britain and America. It's heavily talked about on the internet. Spoilers.
But also, going back to what you were saying, there is really only plot in this episode. There isn't much of anything else. And yeah, like I say, you're right, there is definitely a plot, and the plot is what kind of drives the tension forwards and the narrative forwards, which is why it's hard to discuss this episode without spoiling elements of the plot. But I wasn't that interested in this spy story about these 4 international assassins. Watson's wife used to belong to this group, and now one of them's out for revenge against her. I just really wasn't taken with that story. I mean, I found the earlier on plot when they were trying to solve the mystery of someone who was supposed to be in Thailand but actually died in their garage or their driveway. That was a more interesting case, but then that got resolved pretty much instantaneously. The mystery of why this person was breaking into people's houses and smashing busts of Thatcher, but only those, was not as interesting, but a little bit interesting. But that got resolved very quickly. And then it stopped really being about a mystery and just basically being about uncovering this spy plot that, I don't know, just wasn't that convinced by.
Yeah, I must admit, the point where I went from I'm still quite sort of enjoying this to, oh, more of this, was the point where they smashed the last of the Thatcher busts, or whatever it was, and pulled out her thumb drive, and then they did the little flashback bit to make it clear that actually this plot was all about, once again, the sort of internal arguments between the 2 or 3 main characters, which... that's the sort of thing which is sort of fun and exciting when a show pulls out every so often, but I think basically every episode of Sherlock has been about that since certainly the start of Series 3, including, in a really literal sense, that one that took place entirely inside his head. So, yeah, a bit of variation is all I ask, really. I know it's hard when you've only got 3 episodes every 2 or 3 years, and it seems to be acts of massive mountain-moving effort to get the actors together and actually film an episode, so maybe they do feel that whenever they have them, they should, reach for the stars and make sure every episode is a big event in the characters' lives, but I do kind of feel it's, in doing so, they've kind of lost something a bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you've hit on the issue here, which is because there's only 3 episodes in a series is that every episode has to be like kind of this sort of, I know, enormous event. And, kind of, there is no such thing as like a sort of a standard Sherlock episode. I mean, I'm not saying there should be filler. I'm just saying that each episode strains under the weight of the amount it has to do. It has to advance so many plot lines and be a story in its own right. And they kind of do get a bit convoluted. I just think it's trying to do like 100 things at once, and it can't basically get a basic kind of engaging story out of all the various things it's trying to do simultaneously. I mean, there's a lot of clever writing. I mean, they're trying really hard to make it do all of these things all at the same time, but it is a bit much. I mean, I was reading a review by John Elledge, which we can link to in the show notes. And I think he kind of summed it up best when he said at one point, it started to feel oddly like a clip show of itself. In the fact, the way they cannon through so much stuff, you kind of feel like this one episode was trying to summarize like a whole previous series of Sherlock that we never got to see. I much prefer, rather than feeling the need to kind of shoot along at breakneck pace and kind of, in sort of 10 minutes cover about sort of 3 plot lines, then I much rather they just chose like one simple story and told that. I think it would be better.
This is actually something I've been saying since about Series 2, but the feeling does not go away as the years pass. I'm not that convinced that this sort of 3 hour and a half long episodes format actually does them that many favours, particularly as it becomes harder and harder to get the cast together. And it's like, oh, okay, you've got the cast together for another whole series, which sounds exciting until you realise that's 3 more episodes. I suspect it's a bit late in the day for them to do what I keep saying they should do and change their format from 3 hour and a half episodes to 6 45-minute ones. I still think that would be much better. I guess they're sort of stuck with the format at this stage, but it's a shame because a lot of the episodes end up feeling a bit padded and you only get like a few episodes in a series. I mean, maybe the middle episode will be a sort of day in the life, run-of-the-mill mystery episode, but then of course they'll have to do a series finale where one's got to assume they'll come back to this Moriarty thing that they've weirdly sort of backburnered for now.
Yeah, I agree with you that it would be better if it was sort of longer series with shorter episodes, because the plot lines sort of strain under the weight, but they have to do so much because there's only 3 episodes a season. And I think earlier on it seemed to work a bit better when the characters didn't have as much baggage or backstory or plot that they had to uncover, when they could just basically base each one around, here's a mystery we're trying to solve. One of my other things that I guess is kind of annoying me about the show is that they keep teasing you with something and then taking it away from you. I mean, this goes all the way back to the first one of the second series, when they teased you with a Moriarty reveal and then pretty much nothing happens involving Moriarty to the end of that series. Then in the second series, well, the cliffhanger at the end of the second series was, we'll find out how Sherlock survived, which we don't.
They give you what's basically the explanation, don't they? Or at least the most viable one. It seems like they're basically saying that's what happened, even if they were being a bit smug about it.
Yeah, but then, like, for example, series 3 ends with Moriarty's back, or possibly he's set some trap to be triggered after his death. We're not really sure what. And then that sort of just completely disappears. It's barely mentioned after the first few minutes of the episode. It's certainly not a plot point really at all in the first episode. So I'm a bit annoyed that they keep offering what we think is going to be the plot line and then not doing that.
Well, I mean, it is only a 3-episode series, so it's not as if we'd have to wait a million years to get what I'm assuming will be the ending. I will feel like they've kind of screwed me a bit if we get to the end of the 4th series and they still haven't resolved the cliffhanger from the end of the 3rd series. But I haven't fallen out of love with Sherlock to the extent that you have, in that it's still well-made TV with good acting. It's still one of the only British shows which, in terms of just, how well it's made, actually looks like it could compete with some of the expensive American ones. There's still something very absorbing and well-made about it, even if, I don't know, the days when I actually cared about the plot and was absorbed in the characters have kind of passed me by. I just sort of watch it thinking, yeah, this is a fun sequence, this is a nicely done bit. Part of me was kind of disappointed that there wasn't any wanky sort of plot mechanics in this episode, or any sort of particularly smug flashback bits, because, I don't know, since I've sort of got a bit disengaged with the actual characters, watching them sort of do stupid things for the sake of it is kind of half the reason to watch. The risk of not doing that just makes it come close to actually just being boring, albeit still, expensively made, well acted boring, but still.
I agree with you that it's definitely well made and well acted. I do like how slickly produced the show is. It's beautiful to look at. Some excellent photography of London, and kind of the way they use London as kind of the backdrop to the whole show is really well done. And like you say, it is one of those shows that kind of looks as good as a high-budget American show. And again, having Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman, 2 top-flight actors playing the main parts, they are really, really good at those parts. And now they've done them for a while, they sort of settled into them.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the end when, again, full spoilers, last chance, blah, 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 when Mary dies, I haven't massively warmed to Mary. I mean, she seems fine, but because you only get about 3 episodes every 3 years, and I think she's only been, 4 or 5 episodes total? Possibly a lot less than that. I felt Martin Freeman's sadness, because I think he did act it quite well in the time he had. Those sort of guttural, keening roars he did as she was dying really could have been silly, but they did just about work as genuine just explosions of grief. That and Sherlock sort of shocked, strange expression. Yeah, that was a nicely done scene insofar as I felt the character's sadness, even if, as some have pointed out, it was slightly odd how little Watson did to help dying Mary, considering he's allegedly a doctor.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bad point. Yeah, Martin Freeman acted the scene really well. Again, I felt, I didn't really have much time to get to know Mary. Probably my favourite one from the third series was the middle episode when, it's her and Watson's wedding. I thought that was... It's probably one of the best episodes, and it's quite cleverly linked up. It's just one of the... I kind of feel that, the show kind of plays around with the audience too much. How, everyone's got a twist behind them, and there's, a twist behind that. I'm not saying it would be better if they kept Mary as, an ordinary person. I mean, it's good that they made her character a bit more interesting by giving her this sort of past that gets uncovered at the end of Series 3. It's kind of hard to... get emotionally invested in these characters when there's probably loads of things about them that is either been hidden from us or will just be kind of introduced later on.
Yeah, it's always a bit weird what the level of reality on Sherlock actually is. On some level, it sort of feels like they want to be a sort of comparatively grounded crime show, but on the other hand, they do quite regularly bring in super spies, or they had Moriarty, who was some sort of international crime godfather. I mean, that bit was kind of fun, just because Andrew Scott was good.
Yeah, I mean, it started out as Moriarty just started out as another criminal. He's supposed to be the Napoleon of crime, but he's kind of taken on the level of kind of Blofeld now, in that he's kind of simultaneously assassinating. He's gone beyond that. He's taken over the role of the entire Spectre organization embodied in one human being. He's simultaneously committing all these crimes and assassinations and destabilizing major powers. It's he's like a one-man war. I mean, in Sherlock, again, I felt that he did start out at the beginning as someone who's very, very focused, more intelligent than the average person and less socially skilled than the average person. He seems to be getting to the point when, he's really sort of socially non-functional, but so insanely clever, he's, inhumanly intelligent. It's like you say, what kind of level of reality this is operating on remains unclear.
I can sort of let them attribute any level of intelligence to Sherlock to a degree, although when they brought in the Mind Palace, there was a part of me that was a bit sort of, okay, that's again, a different level of reality that we were functioning on. I mean, to be fair, I think it is an actual mental technique, I gather, to some degree, although I'm sure they've massively exaggerated or oversimplified how it works.
Yes, I think that's the case. It is a mental ability for increasing your ability to remember things, but I don't think people can remember as much as Sherlock does. Although, I don't know.
Well, yes, I don't have a mind palace. I have, at best, a tiny mind shed. But, yeah, it's I don't know. I still find something sort of enjoyable about just watching along with it. I mean, it's certainly some way along for me actually stopping watching, because I'm very rarely unentertained.
I always get swept up in it every time I watch. It's kind of weird cycle of occurrence. Every time I see there's a new series, I get excited and kind of remember the cliffhanger from the last series and think, ooh, it'd be great to have that explored and find out what happens. And then I always kind of get swept up in each episode as it's happening. And obviously the plot twists do take me by surprise, and it is nice to be surprised. But there's also an element of, if your twists are sort of all the time and always outlandish, there's no way you could guess like a plot twist in Sherlock, really, or there's no way you can kind of solve the crime they're investigating before he does. It's always just a bit too outlandish to really play on the audience's level. And then every time I get swept up and I get to the end, it'll feel kind of almost like, I don't know, not necessarily that I was cheated, but that the show kind of obfuscates quite well. At the end, you end up feeling that it's actually probably a little bit more hollow than it appears, and I don't know, maybe a simpler approach could actually be more detailed and richer rather than kind of the sort of flashy approach that they do have.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've also watched a season of Elementary, the American procedural Sherlock show that is often compared to Sherlock. It is more satisfying in that they do mysteries. Those mysteries have endings, and they do usually pay off on the things that they set up in the normal sort of way you expect a TV show to pay things off, rather than zigging and zagging in a bid to unseat you. On the other hand, it is very American slick procedural, and if you watch a lot of episodes in a row, it's possible to start finding it a bit samey. And Sherlock, although it is many things, is not usually too samey, so it depends what you want from life, really. Yeah, I guess
there's a happy medium to be found between a kind of procedural show that kind of just has mysteries and then is solved, and then kind of moves on to the next one as if almost like nothing had happened, or shows that kind of everything is all sort of wrapped up in everything else, to the point that it's just a continuous kind of sort of evolving series of twists that just kind of add layers of complexity to the story, to the point no one's really sure exactly what's going on.
And that happy medium, clearly, is the Robert Downey Jr. films.
Yeah, probably. It's good. That's a good film.
I enjoyed both those films. I'm assuming at this point we're never getting another one, which is a shame, as I would turn up. Back on topic, yeah, I don't know. I'm still curious what they'll do with the rest of the series, because eventually this Moriarty thing has to go somewhere, and maybe now that Mary's dead, they can refocus on something a bit more contained, and there'll be less international spy stuff, which might be good. But, as I say, one of the things about this show is they could decide to do anything. Who knows?
Yeah, I'll certainly be watching the remaining episodes in this fourth series, and I'm sure I'll get swept up in them as they unfold. It'd be nice to have maybe, like, in the last two series, the middle one's always been my favourite because it's a bit sort of more self-contained and a bit more of a traditional mystery to solve. So maybe the second one will be the best one. And also I am interested to see where the Moriarty plot that was teased, well, at the end of series 3, during the special, and at the beginning of this series 4, I'd be interested to see when that actually gets developed into an actual plot. Hopefully it'll pay off.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, in some of the interviews around this, they have sort of stated that they're not sure when they'll get to do more episodes, or whether future episodes will just be a series of specials, because obviously it is getting harder to pin down the actors. So maybe they will, with that in mind, not end on a massive cliffhanger this time.
Well, one of the strengths of the show is they landed these two really talented actors kind of as they were ascending, and then they kind of blew up as megastars kind of around between the sort of second and third series. Yeah, obviously it's getting more difficult to make the show, so I don't know, maybe better if they kind of draw a line under it here, with trying to wrap up their outstanding plotline series 4 and leave, everyone to go on to pursue other projects.
I mean, one assumes that Cumberbatch and Freeman at least are doing this because they want to, I can't imagine the BBC could ever compete with what they could make in Hollywood instead, so they must be doing this out of some actual desire to do it. So I guess as long as they're willing to do it, maybe the scripts will appear, but that's probably something we'll find out in about 5 years or something. Okay, next up, we're going to be looking at the OA, a new sci-fi mystery show from Netflix, created and executive produced by Britt Marling and Zal Batmanglij, and starring Britt Marling as well as the titular OA, a woman who goes missing for 7 years, and, well, she's blind when she disappears, she's not blind when she comes back, which it turns out is just the first slightly odd twist in this show, and when she returns, she recruits a group of 5 followers or acolytes, or, it's slightly unclear what she wants with them, but anyway, she recruits this group of 5 people, mostly from the local high school, and then tells them the story of what happened to her while she was captured. And the rest of the series, as you might be able to predict, then divides into the present day and her retelling the story of her captivity. And it all builds, and increasingly odd things happen, and then there are some revelations. Okay, so obviously, as I said, this is a mystery show. There is a lot of sort of reveals and resolution at the end. We're going to attempt to talk about it in a broad, non-spoilery way for as long as we can manage. There'll probably be at least 5 minutes or so at the end where we actually go full spoilers and talk about the finale. But we'll let you know, and I may even edit in a sound effect if I'm feeling particularly decadent, and then we'll see how it goes. Anyway, Alastair, what did you think of this?
Yeah, I thought it was a good show, considering it seems to be, I guess, a bit more low profile than some past Netflix shows. It's a really great kind of contained story. It's very creepy. Obviously, the main plot focuses around a kidnapping. This woman called Prairie, she's reappeared after having gone for 7 years. You find out she was held against her will by quite a creepy man, and obviously in some very unusual circumstances. The sort of supernatural sort of stroke sci-fi element kind of gets revealed slowly, and that's also got done in a sort of quite tense or slightly creepy way. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a sense that something really bad could happen at any point or is going to happen. I felt they did a really good job of sustaining a sense of creepiness and tension throughout the whole thing, and also a sense of ambiguity. You weren't exactly sure which way it was going, which they kind of kept me in suspense until the finale.
Well, ambiguity in a sense of sort of which bits of this are real, I guess, or, I don't know, they didn't really massively play on is she hallucinating, but there's always a sense of this is just a bit strange, and the sort of the odder elements were always built into, like, the flashbacks, and the present day stuff was, I think, for the most parts, quite grounded, which always lent it this strange air of, is she just imagining it or making it up, or is what's actually going on? Yeah,
that's the ambiguity they created. The present day plot line is very much rooted in the mundane, and the flashback plot line is the fantastical one, but they kind of create a sense of ambiguity of, is it something fantastical that she's become involved with, while she's kidnapped? Is it something that's scientific? I don't know, is it just psychological? It's not real. They've just kind of, the people she's been kidnapped with are suffering from some kind of collective hallucination. It plays quite well off the sort of dynamics of a kidnapping or hostage story, in that she develops bonds with the other people she's been captured and held with. She has a sort of bond, I guess, a sort of Stockholm Syndrome-esque bond with the man who's the captor.
Yeah, I quite liked the way it interfaced with the sci-fi elements, actually, in that, the idea was that, again, trying not to go straight into spoilers, they've been kidnapped to be experimented on. The guy who's holding them is a scientist or a doctor who's kidnapped them to experiment on this specific thing, and then it sort of interfaces with the sci-fi elements sort of like that. So there's some degree of attempt to explain it. It's not entirely just weird shit happened suddenly, although it does take a few extreme turns into weird. I liked the first episode especially, I thought. The first, hour and 10-minute episode, which does really do quite a good job of starting in this sort of quite rooted place. A position that I think you could sort of imagine a sort of primetime BBC One missing persons show. It's like, oh god, our beloved daughter has been found. And then, within the first few minutes, you get, she was blind and now she can see. And by the end of the first episode, it's gone to some quite strange places already. There's been some psychedelic hallucinations and stuff. It's very, very bizarre.
Yeah.
And I just quite enjoyed that. I thought it did quite a good job of walking me from, this is a pleasant, quite meat and potatoes, woman goes missing and gets some sort of sci-fi thing happen to her, to, oh, okay, this is a touch batshit. Fair enough.
No, I agree with that. That's kind of what kept me hooked, is the way that the story is, Prairie telling the story to the other characters, and then you get flashbacks. So it kind of comes out in small chunks, and each one kind of strings you along. You want to find out what happens next. There's usually there's twists and reveals at the end of each episode. I always got to the end of each episode and thought, oh, I really want to find out what happens next.
Yeah, it's very well serialised, and because they've got both the present and the past bits, they can sort of keep a few balls moving at the same time. I mean, her 5 friends, followers, acolytes, whatever, in the present day sequences, they don't necessarily get a huge amount of screen time, but they do mostly get a quite sort of good, clear arc you can sort of grab onto, They do quite a lot, I think.
Yeah. I did kind of feel that the flashback story sort of became the main story. At first, you kind of usually get a bit of intro and stuff from the Prairie character, but after a few episodes, they kind of just go straight into the flashback story, which is kind of the main story. But I thought some of the strongest characters actually were in the mundane story, the present day one.
Definitely, yeah.
I really liked Steve Winchell, who's a character played by Patrick Gibson, who is a sort of school bully. When he's first introduced, he's quite a nasty guy. He's jealous of other guys who the girl that he's sort of seeing shows any attention to, and you're told that he's very close to being sort of expelled and sent to a reform school. And at first you think, oh, this is quite an unpleasant character, but then I don't know, over time you kind of get to see, more of his personality, and kind of you sort of understand why the way he is, and he sort of, he changes as the plot goes along. He goes on a sort of character journey. I don't necessarily want to say too much about it, but I thought that character was handled really well, as were Abel and Nancy Johnson, the two characters that were Prairie's parents, who've just obviously gone through this trauma of losing their daughter, finding her again, and are trying to, adjust back to a normal life, or whatever normal life is possible.
Yeah, I was quite fond of the teacher as well. Betty Broderick Allen, the one who was formed a sort of bond with the Steve character. I thought that was, again, another bit of nicely done characterisation. There was also some kid with shaggy hair who just sort of hung around with them.
Jess or something like that.
I would honestly have to Google his name. But yeah, it's weird. She had her 5 acolytes. There was Steve, Betty, Buck, and the other one.
The one with the scholarship.
French with the scholarship. He was good. I liked him. But then there was the other one, the kid with shaggy hair, who had about 5 lines and little to no characterisation. I think you're right, it's Jesse, because there's a character called Jesse on the Wikipedia cast list, and I can't think of anything else he might have done.
Yeah, we got a little bit of his home life. He had a bit of a story that his parents were either disappeared or dead or something like that, and he was kind of living with his sister. But yeah, I did really, like you say, I did think that the teacher character and Steve character and French were really well done and well developed. I would have liked to have more from Jesse and Buck, because of those were the 2 of the 5 acolytes that weren't developed enough, and the other 3 were so well drawn that I really felt that they could have done something interesting with the other 2, but not so much.
I don't know. I mean, the OA is only 8 episodes. same length as Stranger Things, in fact. And, I still feel some happiness that Netflix have finally decided to start, experimenting with their season lengths a bit and go, right, this show does not need to be 13 episodes, so it won't be. Instead of, 13 episodes is what we do, so let's just crank them out. Because, I don't know, I think they could probably have done a 13-episode series and then they'd have probably had more time to talk about Buck and Jesse and other characters who might have got a bit underserved. There was a character, Rachel, in the flashbacks who didn't get a huge amount. But with Netflix shows, honestly, I'm almost happy if I come away wanting more rather than come away thinking, well, that could have been shorter.
Yeah, I also like the fact that they, again, they didn't stick to standard episode lengths. Like, one episode was like an hour and 10 minutes, and one episode was only like half an hour. They've got this view that, this is streaming TV. It doesn't have to, every episode doesn't have to be the same length, and the episode can be as long as it needs to tell the story it needs to tell. So that was good.
Yeah, we just had a tweet in, because I tweeted, as I always do just before we record, from Alastair Stewart on Twitter, who is a top man on Twitter, by the way. If you like sort of genre stuff, it's worth giving him a follow, who said that he thought the OA was brave and unique, which... it's not a bad description of it, to be honest. I mean, as I said in the last episode we did, the Summary of Year, episode 24, I am kind of in the market for TV that's sort of mainstream sci-fi fantasy area, but maybe a bit less obvious or franchise-driven or predictable, and I can enjoy the OA, which is, they've got the decency to give it a big budget and make it look like properly shiny, but it also let it go to some slightly unusual places. Yeah,
it was quite unusual, and so the story it was trying to tell, in that it wasn't a strictly sci-fi show, it wasn't strictly a mystery show, it wasn't strictly a drama, it was kind of a combination of all three. It's kind of a hard show to pin down, which is why, I would agree with the brave and unique description. There aren't many shows very similar to this, and it is quite an unusual, challenging thing. It doesn't look like an obvious success on paper, but it was very good.
Yeah, I mean, the ending has been slightly controversial, and I think some people felt it was a bit disappointing. I guess we should probably get into that when we go into spoilers, which might well be coming fairly soon. But, I thought the show as a whole, just in terms of what they did, I'm happier they did it than not do it. I think it's got some comparisons to Stranger Things, because it was sort of an 8-episode Netflix series that kind of came out of nowhere to an extent. Like, I don't remember any pre-launch anticipation for either this or Stranger Things. In both cases, I only heard about them because people were talking about them and saying, oh, I'm watching this. Yeah,
there's definitely been a sort of viral marketing. Well, not obviously that makes it sound more deliberate. The kind of awareness of the show was spread in a sort of peer-to-peer way. There's not been like kind of big advertising campaigns on, on Facebook or Twitter, or, for example, I'm just looking at the IMDb now for information on the OA, and I can see there's huge banner adverts down the sides for The Crown, another Netflix show. So Netflix do throw money behind some shows and not behind others. But this one, I think, is really good how well it's done through people watching it, liking it, recommending it to other people, and kind of awareness is spread that way.
Yeah, again, I like the fact that Netflix are willing to put money behind these different forks. I mean, The Crown isn't really my bag, to be honest, but the fact that the same network or company or whatever they technically are is able to throw its weight behind both The Crown and the OA is good, I think. I like that.
Yeah.
Based on my sort of perspective, I don't think this has been quite as big a sort of, viral hit or like mainstream breakthrough thing as Stranger Things was. I don't get the feeling quite as many people have watched it, but I do think it's got a bit of buzz going. I have seen people slowly talking about it more.
Yeah, it's got a sort of picked up a kind of cult following. I think it may not break through to mainstream success like Stranger Things did, but I can imagine it will be, it'll pick up a sort of small fan base of people who really like it because it's very good. It kind of reminds me of Orphan Black in that way, in that maybe not as kind of a bigger, high-profile show, kind of a top-flight BBC or Netflix drama, but it has a loyal and dedicated fan base who really like the characters and really like the show.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good comparison. Certainly, as I always say about Orphan Black, I always worry it's going to disappear up its own arse at any moment, and the OA is all, I think, if it continues, I have no idea, there's no news on a second season that I'm aware of. Yeah, I think I've seen interviews and stuff where Britt Marling has talked about there being the potential for a second season if Netflix wants it. So the possibility of disappearing up its own arsehole is always going to be there, but they seem to have managed not to yet, so that's a good start. And to be honest, in terms of how they might continue it and what that means, is that a good segue to talking about the actual ending, like the last few episodes and what actually happens?
Yeah, I think so. So I guess from this point on, there will be spoilers, sort of major spoilers for the end of the OA, or at least the end of the first series. So if you want to watch it, I'd recommend going into it not knowing the ending. So if you haven't seen it, do skip forwards to the next segment.
Yeah, as ever, timestamps are in the show notes if you want to jump forward to our next bit on Doctor Who. Okay, and I might even put a noise in, like here, who knows.
Yeah.
So, the last few episodes of the OA, in which, well, I mean, to be honest, there were two main bits that I sort of drew out of this. Partly there's the introduction of the movements, strange dancing.
Yeah.
And which is sort of quite easy to laugh at, but also, I don't know, I mean, considering that, as I say, they went from sort of zero to quite weird within the first episode in quite an impressive way. I quite liked the way they found a way to get even odder, to be honest. I quite enjoyed the fact we got to about episode 5 or 6 and then, oh, hang on, there's actually something even more bizarre coming. This is amazing.
Yeah, I really like that. I thought it was part of how they, again, increased the tension and also increased the strangeness of the show as it went on. And it did play into the ambiguity of the show that when the characters who are the hostages or the kidnapped victims being held by Jason Isaacs, but then they sort of start to develop this kind of weird dance that they believe is going to help them travel to another dimension to escape. It does really add to the kind of, is this real? Have they really discovered something mystical or fantastical, or is it just kind of, are they going more insane?
Yeah, I think it was good that they were willing to sort of engage with the strangeness and keep it going. It comes back again, unfortunately, to one of my complaints about The Man in the High Castle, which introduced its strange premise, or at least these sort of slightly more odd, interesting aspects of its premise, and then ignored them until about the last episode. I think there's something to be said for doing what the OA has done and actually engaging with the stranger, more interesting part of your premise throughout the series, so people actually feel like the thing is going somewhere.
Yeah, certainly.
Which I think is good. And, I mean, again, it is a thing that it's kind of easy to make fun of. Like, I think Gavia Baker-Whitelaw on Twitter described the OA as Donnie Darko for fans of interpretive dance, which I don't know if that's meant to be a scathing criticism or not, but it made me laugh.
It's a reasonable summary.
But yeah, and then the actual ending, which, again, I've seen it compared in terms of sort of magical realism, the sort of the willingness to just be ambiguous about it, the sort of, ultimately, they didn't necessarily come down hard in either direction on, is it real or is it just in their heads? If anything, they used the last episodes to very purposefully make it more ambiguous. Yeah.
As we said before with some of the horror things we've covered, or other mysteries, is that if you've created this sense of ambiguity throughout the entire sort of arc of your show, when you get to the end and you have to come down one way or the other, it can be disappointing when you kind of find out what the actual truth. I think this is why a lot of people got annoyed with Lost, because it would always like string you along, and whenever it revealed something, it was usually a bit disappointing. Or they tried to do behind every mystery there's another mystery, and you eventually get the sense that this isn't really going anywhere. So it's a difficult one. They tried, obviously it was a difficult ending. I think they kind of did their best in having a definitive answer one way or the other to the ambiguity, and then kind of at the end throwing in a little bit more ambiguity at the end to leave it slightly open to the audience's interpretation, which is a good way to handle the ending. I mean, if we're going to talk directly about what happens...
Well, why not?
It's revealed that, there's not a fantastical element that is being made up, that the story that Prairie is telling these acolytes isn't true. You don't really know what happened to her while she was away. You get the sense that she was kidnapped and held.
But then again, it's also in the last few shots when they do the dance and they save the school and then she disappears and she gets shot and appears in a white place. It's also heavily implied that it might be true.
Yeah, that's the kind of, like I said, the little bit of ambiguity they throw in at the end to leave it open to the audience interpretation. Right at the very end, a school shooter, a spree killer, enters the school to shoot it up. He or she, actually, you don't really see who the shooter is. Kind of has a lot of people held hostage in the cafeteria, and the 5 acolytes are able to use their sort of slightly strange dance to briefly distract the gunman while a member of the cafeteria staff tackles them, thus meaning that even though the story that Prairie told them was not true, the fact that what she taught them did enable them to do something extraordinary. It wasn't travelling to another dimension, but they were able to save a room full of children from a gunman.
Well, yeah, the idea that it was about them bonding as characters, and, the idea that the moment when they rushed out there to do this dance in front of the gunman, there was so much the feeling that they all knew they could count on each other, which is, your heartwarming message that even if the OA's story wasn't true, at least they got something out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if it actually was coming down that heavily that the OA story isn't true. I think if the second season happens, I suspect we'll be discovering that a lot of the OA story probably was true, if only because, you know, a lot of the stuff in that flashback is quite unresolved. I mean, we don't really know what happens to Hap, the Jason Isaacs character who captures them, or most of her fellow captives. They're all, best I can recall, still down there when the OA escapes, or, well, is chucked out, basically. So I've got to assume that that's the main loose end they'll probably return to if they get a second season, and it probably will turn out to have really happened.
Yeah, I think that's likely, but my interpretation of the story as it stands was that it wasn't true. But again, that's my interpretation.
I think it was a bit of a magical realism novel moment in that it could probably go either way, but there's a bit at the end that heavily implies that the weirder interpretation might well be true.
Yeah, sustain the ambiguity even in the ending. And I also, I liked how it also, I thought it was really good how it linked up the mundane plot line with the sort of slightly fantastical flashback plot line, and it did kind of tie its various narrative threads together quite neatly at the end in a sense that I didn't feel like sort of cheated or just had something taken from me, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I did read a piece on, I think, the Inverse website or something like that. Again, I'll try and post it in the show notes, which did say that they felt that the OA had actually told quite a good self-contained ambiguous story, and if anything, to go back and elaborate on it would be to cheapen this, and it would probably be better if they could find it in them to resist doing a season 2.
I would agree with that. I think it works really well as a self-contained story, and again with like a degree of ambiguity and audience interpretation.
I don't know. I tend to always take the sort of, well, if they do it well attitude. But yeah, I must admit, I don't know how you'd make a season 2 work. I think there will come a point where you can't just keep sitting on the fence without annoying people. So either you continue trying to do that, so it would just get frustrating, or you dive hard into the sort of, I guess, the sci-fi elements. Because if you go for the mundane explanation, then what is there to talk about? And it would just get a bit impenetrable and weird. Although I'm sure I'll watch the second season, because I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm invested now, I'm interested, I like this. I can see very clearly the argument that it may well be better if it didn't happen.
I guess we'll have to see what it's like when and if it happens.
Yeah. The other conversation point I'd seen on this finale was the use of the school shooting in the ending. Is this in poor taste? Could they have found some other form of avertible bad thing they could have stopped, rather than going for mass shootings? Or has American culture reached a stage where school shootings are just an acceptable random act of God to put in your story, which is mildly terrifying?
I guess it had to be something that they could stop. So if you made it like a natural disaster that occurred at the end, like a tornado or something, there's nothing really that like 5 people could do to avert that. So it had to be something that, again, to sustain the ambiguity that is kind of the hallmark of the show, it had to be something that like they could use the dance to divert. So part of me was thinking maybe where they're going is that when they surround the shooter and try to do the strange dance, maybe actually they will open a portal to another dimension and the shooter will be kind of sucked into it. And I was thinking like that would be a slightly odd twist if that was how it ended. But it wasn't. It kind of, again, sustained the ambiguity. Like I say, the dance that they did was able to achieve something fantastical, but you don't know if it was literally just because it was a good distraction or if it was because it did something supernatural or whatever. But whether the shooting is in poor taste, I guess I'm not really sure what else would have worked quite as well within the context of the narrative, in that, yeah, like I say, something that would sustain the ambiguity and something that could be a situation that could have been affected by them doing the dance. But yeah, I guess in the cultural context right now where mass shootings are a problem, I guess trying to normalise them is not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, obviously it gives it a certain degree of relevancy. On the other hand, I don't know, I think possibly the part that has made people feel a bit, about the school shooting is the way it did just sort of swerve out of nowhere and just land in the middle of the plot. Like, it wasn't, as far as I'm aware, like, it might, maybe if I rewatched it paying like minute attention to detail, I would see this, but the character who did the shooting wasn't built up, was he? He wasn't like a pre-existing character.
No, and I thought that was deliberate in the sense that the shooter was nothing connected to any of the main characters. There probably must be 1,000 students at that school. Something's happened somewhere else, and that has kind of come into the story. But it was set up in that the character Prairie has these sort of premonitions. Like, she had premonitions when she was a child of an accident. There was a bus crash that killed a lot of her school friends. And she's had a lot of premonitions. And throughout the show, she has these premonitions of something bad is about to happen in her immediate future, something involving shooting and a gun. So it's kind of set up in that way.
Yeah, again, I don't know. Maybe there's a thin line between offensive and just unsettling. I don't know. It is to be unsettling that mass shootings can just swerve out of nowhere, but I guess maybe if you're at a school in America when realistically, or, well, I don't know, maybe even Britain, who knows. But if you're at a school and you don't necessarily know everyone there, ultimately they can just swerve out of nowhere. Maybe it is ultimately not inaccurate. Who knows? But yes, and on that cheerful note, the OA. It's good. It's probably worth a go.
Yeah, if we've inspired you, go watch it. If we spoiled it for you, sorry.
I was going to say, if you're still listening at this stage, we've also described like the last 20 minutes of the last episode to you in reasonable detail, so still watch it. It's quite good.
Next up, we will be discussing The Return of Dr. Mysterio, which is this year's Doctor Who Christmas special. Takes place present day when the Doctor inadvertently gives a small child superpowers, and he goes on to become a superhero called the Ghost. And they all collectively get mixed up in a alien invasion plotline at Christmas. This is the only Doctor Who story of 2016. They took a break from the main show. Doctor Who will be back at some point in 2017 with a full series, but this is the only major Doctor Who output of 2016. So we both watched it on Christmas Day, as is established tradition in Britain now. Nick, what did you think of it?
I thought it was good, in a somewhat qualified by Christmas special standards way, but nonetheless, I thought this was pretty decent. I mean, we've had about 10, 11 of these now. Yeah, we must have had about at least 10 plus of these, and this was probably among the better ones. Certainly, again, in our tweet from Alastair Stewart, he said he thought it was one of his favourite Christmas specials to date, and I must admit I haven't actually sat down and ranked them. Maybe I should have done that before we recorded this episode, but I do think it's probably at least in the top 5. I think it is one of the slightly better ones. I think there's always a sort of a level of, I don't know, with the exception of the handful that actually have like important plot functions like killing off or introducing new Doctors, the Christmas specials always go for a certain level of throwaway family fun, which can lead them to just feeling a bit nothingy. But I thought this did just about manage to feel fun without feeling inconsistent and sort of not really there. It wasn't too stupid, and even though we were making sort of slightly snippy jokes about them just relying on the power of love endings at Christmas, this actually didn't fall back too hard on the power of love, which I liked.
Yeah, I'd say this is about...
Sorry, I just realised that actually, to be honest, the day is basically saved by love, but in a way that's actually introduced in the plot, so it didn't annoy me as much. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, I'd say this is about average for their Christmas specials. I guess if there's 10 or so, then yeah, ranking this about number 5 seems reasonable, kind of in the middle of the spectrum. Yeah, like I say, it was good, qualified for as a Christmas special. There's a quite sort of clever plot in that the real-life identity of the Ghost is a nanny for this woman who's a journalist who's investigating the Ghost, and he's in love with her, and she's kind of in love with him a bit, but also in love with the Ghost. Doesn't realise they're the same people. She goes on slightly ridiculous dinner dates with the Ghost to interview him for her magazine. It's quite well put together. It's
all a bit Superman. In fact, it's obviously very massive nod towards hat tip, homage towards Superman. It is Steven Moffat doing Superman.
Yeah, no, that's what they're doing. Yeah.
I think again, as one of these sort of homages go, I thought it hit the right level of affectionate hat tips and maybe a bit of gentle vibbing without, in my humble opinion, being too much of a twat about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you can get a bit too far into, taking the piss out of superheroes in a sort of slightly needless, look aren't these silly way. Well, everything's silly. I mean, we're watching Doctor Who. That's also silly. Glass houses, stones. Don't throw stones at the TARDIS.
No, exactly. Yeah, I thought it was well executed. It was the big scene in the middle of the special, which was this kind of dinner date. It's difficult to kind of explain because it is actually put together, I think, quite cleverly in how it all kind of, the complexities of being a superhero and having a regular life kind of get really tangled up in each other. So I thought that was good. There were some quite good moments, like there's a bit when the nanny, being the nanny, not being the Ghost, has to save the baby from one of the sort of strange alien villains. And he has quite a good line where the alien's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I'm the nanny," in the way you'd expect him to say, "I'm the Ghost."
Well, yeah, it was clever without being smug. It's what you want from your Stephen Moffat scripts, really.
Yeah.
It was clearly very sort of carefully constructed, but not in a "I'm showing off, yes, well done, Stephen" way.
Yeah. I'm not really sure what it was really trying to do or achieve in terms of Doctor Who telling a story. It just seems to be like we've come up with this slightly clever, silly conceit based around superheroes and Doctor Who. I'm not really sure what it was trying to do other than just that.
I feel like you could say that about, like, with the superhero part hacked out, you could say that about basically all the Christmas specials. You know what I mean? At least my mum understood this year's. For the last few years, to be honest, my mum has basically turned to me at the end of the Doctor Who Christmas special and said, so was that good? What was that about?
Yeah, I think you're right. This is definitely more accessible than a lot of the previous ones. But I did prefer, like, say, the River Song one because it tied up the River Song plot quite neatly and had sort of a strong emotional moment when we got to the, kind of the resolution of her character. So I don't know if that one worked better for me, I felt, even though, like you say, it was probably less accessible than this one. And there's some others I thought there's others that seem to have a kind of like clear plot thread or like seem to achieve something. Like one of my favorites is the Catherine Tate Donna introduction, The Runaway Bride, which does tell a self-contained sort of Doctor Who Christmas story. There's a mystery, the Doctor solves it, there's some aliens, but it has running through at this point of where the Doctor's at in his emotional journey and trying to make the point that he shouldn't be alone because sometimes he goes too far when he's got no one to hold him back, which leads nicely into the next series when he has to find a new companion, and that kind of connects very well. So you could watch that as an independent, here's just a Christmas mystery involving the Doctor and some aliens and Catherine Tate, but it does kind of fit into the wider context quite neatly, whereas this one just seems to be a bit of Doctor Who's going to do superheroes.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't have it in me to complain about Doctor Who team actually producing a sort of reasonably self-contained special that isn't too bogged down with continuity. Because a lot of the time when they've tried to do like big continuity in the Christmas specials, it's gone kind of badly. I mean, the end of time. The end of time was kind of blur. The time of the Doctor was, sorry guys, pretty terrible.
The time of the Doctor was like completely incomprehensible to anyone who hadn't followed the Moffat plot arc, and also just a bit all over the place.
It was the twin victory. You can't understand it if you haven't seen all the Moffat stuff, and even if you do understand it, it's just not very good. So, in summation,
Yeah, and obviously there are much worse Doctor Who Christmas specials than this one. The double part, although Christmas New Year special of The End of Time was terrible, possibly a low point for all Doctor Who since they brought it back.
I wasn't going to go that far. I think it was clearly a bit slack, but I thought the performances carried it. Anyway, let's not get sidetracked by listing what we think of every Doctor Who Christmas special.
No, that's a good point. But like I say, I think this one ranks about in the middle. I think it's good. And I do take your point. It's nice to do something that
my mum could understand.
Yeah, that's accessible to a Christmas Day audience that just want to watch like a one-off special story.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these Christmas specials, it is just, here's a plot you could summarise on a napkin, which gives you an excuse for a few big, splashy set pieces and jokes, and maybe a little bit of emotional undercurrents, a bit where you feel sad at the end of The Snowmen because Clara's dead, the bit at the end of, was it Last Christmas with Nick Frost, where Clara's also dead? Oh, hang on, pattern developing. Yeah, a bit, the emotional bit at the end maybe didn't land quite as well, but to be honest, it was, yes, I didn't have quite as much of a cry as I sometimes have at these Christmas specials, but on the other hand, again, I'm not going to necessarily complain about them finally managing a bit of understatement, and I thought the hour went by fairly pleasantly for the most part. The only part that didn't quite land for me was the scene where they revealed that the Grant, Clark Kent's character, had been fancying this girl since they were both 12 or something, which was a fairly random scene, and it didn't seem to add much. It doesn't even add much to like the Superman analogy, because obviously Clark Kent doesn't meet Lois till they're both adults, and it just runs the risk of making your sort of sympathetic lead into one of those guys who sort of follows the girl they fancy around, moaning about them dating other guys.
Yeah.
Which isn't really, I think, what they were going for. I mean, looking back, maybe there was an attempt to cover a plot hole. Maybe they were worried that, the bit at the end where the Lois Lane analogue talks about how amazing Grant is, Grant being Clark, obviously, wouldn't work as well if she'd only known Grant for a few minutes as her nanny, so they wanted to give them this whole backstory together so it would be, I don't know, more reasonable when she talks about what a good bloke he is. But I don't know, I feel like if that's the case, I think it's slightly overthought. I think you could have just fallen back a bit on the Christmas power of love and the obvious Clark Kent analogy and just assumed that she's worked out what a lovely bloke he is. And yeah, I mean, fortunately, the sort of the long-term crush aspect was only really in that one scene, which is one of the reasons it was so annoying, to be honest. Like, you could cut this out and the story would still work. It adds nothing. In fact, you could cut it out, the story would be better. So that one scene was slightly frustrating.
That's valid criticisms. I thought the aliens were quite good. The villains in this one, the sort of sentient brains in jars that were trying to take over the world by possessing humans and sort of replacing the human's brain with them, this sort of weird sentient alien brain. I thought that was quite good. It was a bit gross and a bit sort of over the top, but in a kind of endearingly Doctor Who way.
And there was a slight possible hint about them maybe coming back or something, as you do in your sort of sci-fi horror story, and they might not really be defeated. Fair enough.
Peter Capaldi is great and really watchable as the Doctor. Having Matt Lucas back was also quite good.
Yes, there you go. There's your setup for the next series. There's your role in the art plot.
Yeah, that's how it propelled things forwards. The interesting things about this Doctor Who special is that the Doctor really wasn't actually in it very much. He was much more of a secondary character in that he kind of sort of moved in the background a bit and engaged with some of the plot lines, but it was much more about the Grant stroke the Ghost character.
I mean, I haven't done the research on this again. Bad podcaster. But that's not unusual in these Christmas specials, is it? They often bring in like a big actor or a big character as the guest star, and the Doctor sort of shares the limelight with them to an extent.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the sort of the eventy, this is the gimmickness of it.
Yeah, that's part of it. I felt this one it was like slightly more obvious that the Doctor was sort of a secondary character, which is not necessarily a criticism, it's more of an observation.
I mostly like this. It was fun. I understood it. My mum understood it. The level of sort of ridiculous high camp might have been a bit weird in a regular episode, but it was in a Christmas special, it felt about right. I quite liked the last series as well. Maybe knowing he's leaving suits Steven Moffat, maybe it'll, enables him to relax a bit, not so much show off and set up big plans and just tell his stories, then go home. I don't know. Maybe he's finally calmed down. Based
on the fact that this Christmas special is better than a lot of the previous Moffat Christmas specials, that makes me feel hopeful that the next and final Moffat series will be above average for a Moffat Doctor Who series. So if the trend continues of improvement. And I really liked the last series, the one that was mainly two-parters, with Maisie Williams. Yeah, I thought that was really good, even though I've spoken to some people who didn't like it at all. But I thought it was good and has some great stories, so I'm hopeful that this final one will be good as well.
Oh yeah, at this point he's leaving anyway, so if he could manage to go out on a high, then all the better. Okay, and finally this fortnight. 2 weeks ago, in the last recommendations section, I recommended Alastair, the first volume of the JLA series by Grant Morrison and Howard Porter from 1997. So this is the Justice League of America, for those of you not down with your comic acronyms, and this is DC's main superhero team, featuring Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Aquaman, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, and other characters that you probably think are lame, because not that many of them have been in good movies recently or ever, although that Flash TV show is okay. Anyway, yes, this is the run from 97, which did take the JLA from sort of maybe slightly disregarded also-rans to genuinely being DC's big prime series again. And yes, I read it. This was the first book that convinced me that characters other than Batman in the DC stable could actually be good. So after a couple of disappointing comic book movies, I thought I'd recommend it to Alastair to see it could have the same effect on him. So he's read, I think it ended up being the first 9 issues, plus the Secret Files and Origins thing that was included in the same book. I loved this when I was a teenager. Alastair Stewart, in his tweet, also said he was very fond of it. Alastair, what did you think of it?
Well, as you said, this is my first time reading traditional superhero comics, sort of something, main characters from one of the big stables, not something that's designed to be indie and a bit different. It was an interesting experience, certainly. In some ways, it was exactly what I expected it to be, and in some ways, it really wasn't what I expected it to be. So in terms of what I expected, it was very archetypally a superhero story. It's very much kind of a story about sort of superheroes in a superhero world. There's bits where Superman and Batman refer to each other as Superman and Batman. There's very little sense that any kind of mundane reality exists.
Well, yeah, I mean, these are characters who all, I think, with the possible exception of the Martian Manhunter, have their own comics. So, yeah, to the extent if you want to see them, go to the shops in their pants, that's what they have a solo comic for.
No, it's fair enough. It's not a criticism. But it's kind of what I expected. The situations were, as I expected, everything's sort of slightly fantastical sci-fi threats to the world being defended by superheroes. So, yeah, it's kind of what I expected a superhero comic to be. What kind of surprised me about it is, having watched all the superhero films that have come out in the last sort of 20 years, it didn't actually ground me enough in the universe to actually give me a sort of a handle on what was going on. I thought I'd had a reasonable grounding in superheroes, but it turns out I didn't from the films. I thought it would kind of be a bit more accessible than it was, and I guess it was much more fantastical than I expected it to be.
Yeah, I mean, historically this was the late 90s, so the really excessive sort of archetypal 90s period where everyone had like guns, leather jackets and massive shoulder pads had kind of passed.
Yeah.
I think if anything, this was the period where comics were reacting a bit to the the grim and gritty period, which, to be honest, the movies are now sort of revisiting by going a bit sort of gleefully silly again at times. I mean, Grant Morrison, as a writer, does, I think, enjoy his gleefully silly weird shit. He's written a lot of comics now, which are basically, here's my weird attempt to make strange 40s Silver Age concepts work in a modern storytelling way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good bit of ambitious writing. There were lots of things I liked about this. I quite liked how, reading these first 10 issues, it's a series of self-contained stories, some of them spanning a couple of issues, some of them entirely within one issue. The stories are very fast-paced. There's always a quick payoff. The tension doesn't really drop, so that's all very good. There's loads of different situations and characters. It's difficult to get bored because there's so much going on and always something new and different happening, like as well as the core Justice League characters they'll throw up. Occasionally, like Green Arrow will be in it, for example, for a bit, or various other characters. I do like also, kind of, because they tell so many stories, their ability to kind of experiment and move around and kind of, I don't know, like change the dynamics between different stories. I think one of the most interesting one in this volume of comics, there's one when they're all kind of trapped in this virtual reality world, and they kind of mix up the format a bit. So they've got Superman has the powers of the Green Lantern in that sort of in this virtual world, kind of within the world of the story. So I quite liked, how they were able to experiment and play around and make things a bit different.
Yeah, I quite liked that story as well. Partly also for the sort of, I think, again, I was talking to Alastair Stewart about this on Twitter. He described it as a sort of a Die Hard-esque bit with the Green Arrow kid alone in the JLA's fortress trying to fight the supervillain by himself. I quite enjoyed that bit. I thought that was quite a nice grounded, slowed out of the pace. Just getting into his head for a bit and having him fight by himself.
Yeah, that was a good, tense story. And it was quite well put together in how all the beats kind of work together. In terms of things I not necessarily didn't like about it, it's not particularly subtle writing at times. Like the first story begins with some new superheroes arrive on Earth. They're called the Hyper Clan. Instantaneously, the Justice League don't like them, and pretty quickly they're revealed to be actually evil. There's no sort of ambiguity, and there's kind of no question really ever set up in the audience's mind about whether these new superheroes are bad guys. It's kind of straight to, they must be villains. Oh yeah, it's been revealed they're villains. Same thing happens in they introduce a character called Woman of Tomorrow, and again she appears and then pretty much instantly is revealed to be like a baddie or a mole sent to infiltrate the Justice League. So the plotting sometimes was not sophisticated. There's also some of the dialogue, I guess, can be on the sort of slightly ridiculous side, but it's kind of the stereotypical stuff you sort of expect, but I thought was maybe a bit of a cliche. Villains just kind of explaining their plots to the heroes for no reason, or sometimes villains even just seem to explaining their plots to no one at all. They just kind of narrate what they're planning on doing.
It probably gets into have your cake and eat it territory, but I think Grant Morrison likes his sort of, I am doing the trope. Look at me, I am obviously doing the trope. I know I'm doing the trope. Like, I wasn't there a bit where the villain, is it the Key in the last two-parter?
Yeah, he's definitely just, like, he's by himself. Like,
yeah,
and he just narrates his plan to thin air, and it's
so
like,
does he actually comment on it though? Does he say something like interesting side effects of my expanding consciousness? I can't seem to stop talking to myself.
Yeah, I think he might have hung a lantern on it, but I don't know. Just because it's a trope doesn't mean it's good. So you can do tropes, and you can try and subvert them, I guess, in different ways. But there was a lot of sort of one-liners and a lot of like, haha, you thought I had defeated me, but actually I have this, and I was like, just do it. Don't talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's always a sort of a thin tightrope you're balancing on between moving through ideas in a way that's quite fun and cool and just sort of, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens.
Yeah.
And yeah, reading it again in my early 30s, again, he's always sort of balancing on that tightrope. My least favourite story in this was probably the middle two-parter with the angels, because that did sort of just get into slightly shapeless, and then this happens, thing, stuff. I can get on board with this stuff quite quickly as a long-term superhero reader, but you are just throwing things at me at this point.
Like you say, it does sustain the tension and keep the pace up, which is good, but it can get a bit much.
The rest of it I mostly liked. The Tomorrow Woman story, I quite liked the way it sort of went through the story quite quickly, rather than drawing it out, because I don't know, I appear to be at the moment quite bored of things being drawn out, but it did mean she sort of went from goody to baddie, technically baddie to goody to baddie to goody or something in the course of like between pages. It was quite quick.
Yeah.
But I don't know, and I guess obviously again with a sense of trope awareness, the writer knows that we know that the mysterious new heroes are probably somehow evil, because he knows that we know what sort of comic this is, so why faff around with it. But it does mean that the villains didn't really, there was no sense of we'll give these villains a major point, or I don't know, what's the thing, and an understandable point of view. What do they want? World domination. Is it bad? Yes. Should the hero stop it? Definitely.
Yeah, that's the kind of level of subtlety we're dealing with here. The other thing about it is, I don't know, and I felt it wasn't particularly accessible for someone, I guess, who hadn't read many comics. Like, you mentioned the Angel plot line. I wasn't sure if these were characters that appeared before and we were supposed to know who they were.
Sorry, Neron, the big evil Hell Lord, has appeared in a few DC comics before, but not in a way that relates to this story, really. He's just a big evil Hell Lord. That's just what he does. He just turns up. The rest of them are new.
Yeah, and so I didn't... Yeah, but I guess I wasn't sure if it... Was this something we're supposed to know and have more context was? I mean, it's kind of hard to judge. And like the Angels was another one. I was a bit concerned. Are they supposed to be literally the angels from the Bible? I mean, it's kind of odd. Does Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman also exist in a world where the god of the Bible kind of also interferes and plays around with reality?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think in the last 20 years, and it has depressingly been the best part of 20 years, like 19 years since this came out, I think it is something they've dialed back quite a lot. Like, there is definitely a sort of hell and heaven in the DC universe because they like being able to bring in like demons and angels into the stories. I think they've become increasingly coy about whether there actually is a god for maximum accessibility to all. But yeah, it is an odd aspect of the universe, which again, because Grant Morrison just wants to speed through the tropes and do the thing, he doesn't really feel the need to stop and have a chat with you about.
No, I guess so, and which is fair enough. I just wasn't sure if you were supposed to have prior knowledge, the characters like Neron or things like that. I mean, there's also just some things that I just kind of found a little bit difficult to follow, or there's a bit when Superman suddenly turns blue. And then he's
I'd actually forgotten that was going to happen in this volume. I thought, in my distorted sense of time, I thought that was later on. Yeah, I did laugh at that.
Yeah, I'm just not really sure what was really going on. Like, why is Superman blue and electric now?
That was one of the last gasp, ridiculous 90s plot twist of the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, after Superman died and then came back, he turned into cool-looking electric blue character for about a year, and for some very ill-defined reason. Yeah, that was odd. I mean, yeah, I think there's an air of sort of throw big concept, because, if you're going to have the big team who have these like borderline godlike powers, why not just introduce big things and go, this is angels. This is a group of evil aliens. Now let's throw them at each other. Possibly, if you're going to throw things at people at that speed, so to speak, it does rely on them not being bogged down by not knowing, why Superman is blue or what's with the new Green Lantern who everyone keeps patronising.
Yeah, well, the Green Lantern one I thought worked quite well because they did drip feed a thing of, there's a new Green Lantern, he's not quite chilled with the group yet, especially the Flash dislikes him. That kind of thought was kind of, that was teased out over the course of the 10 or so issues I read. Yeah, I kind of got a sense of that, so it's not like everything was just kind of thrown at you, sort of sans context, but some of it really was. Like, again, Superman suddenly being blue, I guess, is the obvious example. The other thing that just started me a bit strange is before Superman was blue, he also had a mullet, and I just found it incredibly distracting. And he's supposed to be the all-American Superman. Like, why does he have a mullet? Is he in Bon Jovi now? I don't really understand what's going on.
To be honest, that's just another one where I can't really do much beyond shrug my shoulders and go, yeah, the 90s were weird.
Yeah, it was the 90s, things like...
The 90s, everyone was either had a mullet or was in some sort of weird, zappy blue energy form. Yeah,
that's fair enough.
They're dead. But yeah, it's. I mean, again, it's the symptom of being sort of the crossover team book where you just have to sort of deal with stuff. I think I did once read an interview with Grant Morrison regarding some stuff that happens later on in this, like, 40-issue run he did. So one day I was writing a Jack A script, I got an email saying, oh, by the way, from issue 17 of your comic onwards, Wonder Woman would have been replaced by her mum, so just write that in.
Oh, yeah, it must be a difficult thing to manage.
I mean, being Grant Morrison, I think he just sort of had her go, hi, I'm Wonder Woman's mum, and then they just got on with it, but because that's how he handles these things, but yeah.
That's fair enough. I understand that, like, you have to have high stakes for superhero team-ups. I mean, the fact that it was, like fighting alien invasions or angels and stuff, it wouldn't really kind of make sense in a sort of gritty thing if they were fighting, like, gangsters and stuff. I mean, that's why Batman on his own works quite well just against people like the Joker or the Penguin, who are sort of gangsters or, kind of that kind of gritty stuff works. But it wouldn't really work so well for a big superhero team-up. I mean, in a world where, the Jokers are sort of slightly menacing, crazy murderer stroke gangster stroke agent of chaos, doesn't really sit quite well next to, like, the world where there's kind of Amazon goddesses or people with magical power rings. So yeah, the need to kind of embrace the OTT-ness of it is evident, and I can see that's why they went with. I don't think you could have really told a radically different story and it would have been as entertaining.
Yeah. The art, I don't know, I think it sort of works for the story they're telling. It has perhaps not aged amazingly in the 19 years since late mid-90s. There was a certain sort of posed stiffness to it.
I thought it was very well drawn. It kind of conveyed what's going on. I mean, again, in these fast-paced, complex stories, you kind of need things to be kind of quite apparent. Like, you need to be able to look at each panel and know exactly what's going on, or else it's going to get confusing quickly. There was some very 90s hallmarks, such as, Superman has a mullet, and the drawing of Wonder Woman, and to a lesser extent the Woman of Tomorrow, is quite sexualized, or at least, it doesn't really have much in the way of clothing, which strikes me as a fairly, hangover of the past.
Well, yeah, but it's not just the costume. I mean, it's possible to draw Wonder Woman's costume, even that one, without it looking necessarily completely like she's doing a bikini shoot. But in this particular comic, she does point her cleavage at the, air quotes, camera quite a lot.
Yeah, so it strikes me as these are sort of the way it's done in comics, and that's why I think a lot of people sort of write critiques about this and try to point out that there's a sort of subtle ideology that runs through all of popular culture, not just comics. I think it'd be unfair to single out comics individually. It's definitely present in video games and music videos. Yeah, you can see that thread running through popular culture, and you can see it expressed in comics in the way they draw Wonder Woman and things like that. But yeah, it's difficult. What I'm saying is, if you're writing with established characters, established plot lines, I guess there's a institutional rigidity, and that means that comics, I guess, they don't change that quickly because of the kind of the history and the sort of institutionality, is that a word? The kind of way it's kind of built up over time, and it takes a long time for things to change. So I guess that comes back to us saying that in some ways reading these traditional comics were kind of very much what I expected, because I kind of expected there to be a certain amount of this sort of stuff, this kind of archetypal comic writing and drawing. But also I was slightly surprised by how much of it was, and how much it kind of adhered to the archetype, and also how they have tried to go in a slightly different direction with the film, certainly.
I don't know, there's a very gentle sort of fringe of postmodern stuff. It's clearly self-aware to an extent, but I think ultimately it's very much embracing it and going, look, no, this is a big smashy, punchy superhero comic ultimately. We're not necessarily deconstructing the notion. And yeah, if you're not used to it and willing to just lean into the stupidity of it, it's probably just quite sort of, okay, I see.
Well, it was interesting, because, it was good to try something new and to see, what it was like, because it's kind of, everyone has a kind of awareness of superhero and superhero comics. Like, we all know the main major characters, certainly like Batman and Superman, but you kind of do need to read them at some point if you want to engage with the pop culture as it is.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what the Justice League movie is going to do. I mean, one of the reasons I think this, for me at least, works is that it does these sort of big, stupid concepts, but it does them in quite a bright, happy way. Not, it's not like constantly grinning and optimistic, but it's clearly enjoying itself to some extent. There's some sort of glee in just seeing Superman fly along smiling and punch someone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like seeing this story only reenacted through the sort of angry-looking grey thug of Batman v Superman would be about 1,000 times worse.
If you tried to make it kind of gritty and realistic, grounded in a world that's more recognisable as ours, it just would look like it was either pretentious or just quite silly. Even something that's very fantastical is difficult to believe in a world that was sort of recognisable as our world. So I think, as you're saying, it's going to be interesting what they do with the Justice League film, if they go more high camp, I suppose, or more gritty realism. Certainly trying to mix the two in Batman v Superman didn't go well.
But yeah, it was weird reading this again, in that, a lot of the lines and moments and stuff did bring me flooding back to my teenage self, and I quite enjoyed that. I quite enjoyed the sort of the up-tempo silliness of it. I must admit, even more so than I first realised when I was rereading it, I was like, oh, maybe this isn't the thing to give to someone who isn't familiar with comics. But I'm glad you got something out of it.
I appreciate being thrown in the deep end and, finding out whether I sink or swim, and I think I kind of splashed along fairly happily for a while.
Okay, I'll take it. Okay, so possibly among my least successful recommendations so far, but at least we've got something to talk about. Alastair, what have you got for me next time?
Right, well, next episode we're going to be doing another album. So we did a few last year, but not many. So I'm going to be recommending you possibly one of my favourite albums of all time, certainly one that I listened to a lot at university and really kind of summed up that period in my life for me. It's Levelling the Land, the second album from folk punk group The Levellers.
You've certainly talked about this a lot in the pub.
Yes, I am sure anyone who knows me will know I brought up The Levellers a lot and how much of a fan of The Levellers I am. This is definitely their best album. Even amongst people who aren't necessarily big fans of The Levellers, it's kind of held up as the sort of iconic folk punk protest album of the early 90s. Yeah, so you'll be listening to that and you can let me know what you think.
Okay, fantastic. I will sort that out. Hopefully, despite being an old album, it's still available as an MP3 download? Oh, yes it is. Okay, excellent. I'll give it a go. And that's all for this fortnight. Thank you for listening. If you've just got back to work after a busy Christmas holiday, we did publish a bonus episode, as I think I mentioned earlier, our previous episode, in fact, 24, where we met up in person to talk about 2016, so if you need more to help kill time at work or whatever, then do go back and listen to that. It was a good time. And yeah, we're also available on iTunes, where you can subscribe and get this episode, that episode, and all the other episodes, and maybe even leave us a review to help us grow as a show. You could also follow us on Twitter as @MFV Podcast, where we post about podcast things and occasionally the latest geek news, and we're also on Facebook at Moderate Fantasy Violence.
You can also go to our website, which is moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to all our previous episodes, our extended audio clips under the name Excessive Fantasy Violence, and various bits of writing that we've done over the course of the show. If you head to the website right now, you'll see Nick has written up his top 10 TV shows of 2016, so you can find out what he liked from the year that just finished. You can also find my summary of film in 2016. I've been Alastair Ball. You can find me on Twitter at Alastair J.R. Ball. You can also find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And yep, I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on Twitter as @NickMB or on my website at nickbryan.com, including news of my self-published comic books and, to be honest, mostly links back to my writing on the MFV website. Okay, and that is all for today. Join us in 2 weeks for episode 26, where we will be revisiting Sherlock to find out how Series 4 ended, and also talking about Oscar contender movie Silence and Patrick Ness adaptation A Monster Calls, as well as, of course, the Levellers album that Alastair just recommended me. Okay, thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, and finally we're going to talk about the JLA series by Grant Morrison and Howard Porter from a year that I haven't bothered to look up and now will.
That's a good outtake.
I sometimes wonder if his outtakes are cheapened by the part afterwards where we inevitably go, that was a good outtake.
Well, you can edit that off. Probably better if you do.
Can I? But should I?
Oh.
Yes.
It's all very meta.
I'll probably leave this whole bit on the end and people can just enjoy how infuriatingly smug it is. Hi guys.
Hello, future listeners.
Goodbye, future listeners.